8 traveling fighters brought together by a common destiny now meet at the battle arena Toshinden.
Just a couple of weeks before Christmas 1994, I had seen for myself a glimpse of the awesome power of the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. CE Games in Glasgow had both machines on import, and they were both set up displaying their track sequences. The Saturn had Virtua Fighter, which looked awesome, and the PlayStation had Ridge Racer, which looked equally as impressive. But as both machines were running different games, it wasn't clear at that time which machine was going to be better. But just a few weeks after Christmas, and on another visit to the store, the machines were still running game track sequences. The Saturn still had Virtua Fighter, but the PlayStation had this game, Battle Arena Toshinden, which, sitting next to Virtua Fighter, looked really bad. The intro looked cheap, and the only thing impressive about it was the monologue. Huge amounts of speech was a thing in those days, and only CD-based games could handle the huge amount of crystal clear speech. And it was at this moment, seeing this, that I reaffirmed to my mate that when the Saturn comes out officially in the UK, I was going to buy that, as the PlayStation looked terrible. A very early and harsh judgment on my part. You see, I made my mind up without even playing the game, or the PlayStation, or the Saturn for that matter. These machines were super expensive on import. Each console was £1,000, and at that price, they were not made available to play, so young gamers could only watch. But when I did get the opportunity to play Toshinden a few months later, my opinion changed a little. Behind the incredibly cheap exterior is a game that dared to challenge. It was one of the first fighting games after Virtua Fighter on arcade and console that boasted polygonal characters in a 3D environment, and features a sidestep manoeuvre which is credited for taking the genre into true 3D. Initially made to be a PlayStation exclusive, the game was released in Japan a few weeks after the console's debut, and released internationally by Sony Computer Entertainment as a launch title. Its American division had promoted it as a Saturn killer, so Sony had already decided who their competition was going to be at this early stage. A weapons-based fighter, Toshinden features 8 anime-style characters and has gameplay mechanics such as special and projectile attacks similar to 2D fighters like Street Fighter. And while I have no love for these visuals, there was some praise in the media. Most magazines gave critical acclaim for its graphical innovations like Gurad shading and transparent effects. But to me, it was the presentation of the game that always made it look cheap. As with other games of the genre, the player wins by depleting the opposing player's health, having more health than their opponent if the time runs out, or knocking their opponent out of the non-walled arena. Unlike many fighting games of the time, it was possible for a player character to accidentally fall off the arena with a mistimed run or special move, resulting in some unique tactics. If I can get back to the visuals here, I have to be honest, I have never seen a cheaper looking game in all my life. I know, it's got a decent polygon count, and I know it used some technical visual effects that had rarely been seen at the time, but from the opening title screen, with this cheap and nasty looking wipe in effect, to the incredibly horrible and nasty looking options screen, these are quite often the first thing a gamer sees when firing up a game at home, and a little effort would not have gone astray here. Then we have the character select screen, which looked pretty much like all other fighting select screens, and so I won't be too harsh on that. But when you get to the fight, and you see this cheap Casio looking timer, this ugly font that was used to the player's name, and what the hell is this? A score? Just about every other 3D polygon fighter had moved away from scores and opted to use time to grade your efforts. But if you can ignore the hideous appearance, as Drax once said, it's better to be ugly, as people love you for what's on the inside. And Toshinden was actually a fairly decent game to play, if I am being honest. Off the bat though, it's not all sunny grasslands. I had always found the controls to be a little unresponsive, but in those days, this was something gamers just adapted to and worked around. I managed to get a quick shot on it at CA Games round about spring 1995, and I liked it, but I had already made my mind up. I was getting a Saturn, and while I enjoyed this game, I did forget all about it. Until I got my PlayStation later that same year. And after playing the buggy Virtua Fighter on the Saturn, this game didn't really compare with Virtua Fighter, but I still picked it up, as it was pretty cheap at £35 on release. And after a few goes, and after a few versus sessions at home, you get to appreciate the difference in gameplay compared to Virtua Fighter. The ability to dive and jump in and out of the foreground was a welcome addition, and so easy to pull off too. In Virtua Fighting, the fighting felt more like it was in a 2D vein with 3D graphics. Toshinden felt proper 3D, as you could literally run rings around your opponent, and as a launch title in the West, it wasn't a terrible title to use at launch. And it's just as well when they did really, because once Tekken came out, it was game over for Toshinden. Toshinden on the PlayStation is one of those games that does show graphics and sound are not everything. It's the gameplay that counts. And I do feel that some of its more technical visual achievements were lost to many, and as such, it may have been a little too ambitious. I do not think the game has aged terribly well visually, or in the gameplay stakes. But at the time of its release, it was riding the wave of new, more powerful consoles, and did show the huge gulf between 16 and 32-bit gaming, and showed early adopters of the PlayStation what was to come. Toshinden was a popular early title on the PlayStation, and it spawned sequels starting with Battle Arena Toshinden 2, as well as manga and anime adaptations. But it got lost in the Tekken crowd, and then the Soul Edge crowd as well. I would say it is definitely worth a playtest. It's incredibly affordable and can be found for a few quid on eBay. And that was my look back at Battle Arena Toshinden on the PlayStation. If you like this video, then give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Toshinden on any format, or any version for that matter. And as always, a massive thank you to all of those who have subscribed and commented on my channel. Your feedback and support really does go a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of this support. So thank you from me. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.